Vickie had an afterlife experience. When her fiancé died in her arms, she was crushed and traumatized, as you can imagine. But he did not leave her side. He continues to be in her life on the other side, that is interdimensionally. When we move from the flesh body interdimensionally, sometimes we're called ghosts, sometimes we're called poltergeists, sometimes we're called angels, but we are interdimensionally. And those are the type of entities we are and what our death experiencers see and interact with when they are dead on the other side. So you see how we move freely back and forth, more freely than we think. So Vickie had this experience, and it really changed her life, as it does most people's life who have afterlife experiences. We'll have another speaker towards the end of the year who also has had this type of experience. He's a published author, and he'll be sharing probably a lot of the same information. You'll find a consistency with these phenomena across people's lives. Now, Vickie's story is told in these books that you can find on the back. Her story is in this book, Messages, and it's available for you in the back. It's kind of a shortcut. You didn't have to write it yourself. That's pretty sweet. And then this is the first book that the author wrote. The author is here. His name is Ernie, and I'll have him say a few words about it. Ernie, if you could please stand up.
Okay, just you need mic or just...
Yeah, come on up. Here you go.
Thank you very much. My name is Ernie Jackson. It was a little over 8 years ago that our son, Quentin Stone Jackson, transitioned. He passed away in an accident that didn't make any sense, but then he immediately began to visit. Completely, totally rocked my world. Changed everything, because I didn't know it worked that way. We've been on a crazy rocket ride since. For the first 3 or 4 years after he transitioned, you couldn't shut me up. I mean, I would walk up to strangers and tell them about my son's visits. And that's what got us into contact with Vickie. Since we had mutual friends, since they knew I was on fire with this divine knowledge, they put us into contact. And we met at Whitestone's Tea House in Belmar. And when Vickie first walked up, I really didn't recognize her because she was very, very somber, very subdued, which is natural. You know, she's just lost her fiancé. I mean, it's natural to feel that way. But I reached out to her and I hailed her and I said, "Vickie, is that you?" And then she smiled. That smile and that twinkle in her eye that I know Walt fell in love with. So I'm here to support Vickie. Our books are in the back. Quentin's Legacy has her story in it. We're here to help any way we can. Thank you, Vickie.
Yeah, thank you, Ernie. Yeah, you can just have those. And if you would like to pass those books around for people's perusal of the table of contents, they're free to do that. Also, in the meantime, I have a sheet here for helpers and volunteers at the 2018 conference. I'll just hand this over for it to be passed around. If you're moved to help and volunteer, it'd be great to have some of your help on the ground on the day of. Like I said, there's plenty to do, so your help is very, very much welcomed. So with that, I would like to introduce Vickie to you, and she'll take us through her PowerPoint presentation. Let me give you, do you have it? You have it. All right, so please help me welcome Vickie Baroch.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, JJ, for having me here. I'm grateful to a mutual friend of ours, Nancy, who couldn't be here tonight, too, but she put me in touch with JJ and this group. And as Ernie mentioned, another mutual friend of ours put me in touch with he and his wife, Christine, and I've been very grateful for that support through this time. So as JJ said, I'll read in a second from what I wrote in the book with Ernie. But a little over 4 years ago, my fiance passed away suddenly just next to me. And it's also, as JJ said, it's really changed my life in so many ways that I would never have expected this journey to be coming my way. And so I'm really grateful to be here and share those experiences that have come up since what happened. And there's pictures that I've been taking, I'm not a professional photographer, but I just take pictures with my phone. And there's been some really interesting things that have shown up and very poignant, very sentimental type things. So that is something I want to share with you later as well. So for now, I wanted to read what I wrote because that will tell you where my story begins. So I've titled this The Touch of a Kind Soul. Angels on earth exist. If it wasn't for divine intervention, it may have been that Walt and I were not blessed with the time we had on this earth together. And my fiancé was Walt Whitney, is his name. After random meetings in passing at the pool of our apartments and a few conversations in the parking lot, finally around the first part of October 2011, Walt asked me if I would like to have dinner with him. Thrilled, and we went to Sienna in Castle Rock. It was a busy week as I was deep in the midst of preparations for events at my office and then headed to Seattle to visit friends as soon as the week's duties were complete. Looking back on how special that night was, it seemed that all those things took a back seat to a connection that neither Walt nor I were aware at that time would run so deep, or as I now know, heartfelt, blessed, and filled with serendipitous love connections. We talked, laughed, and got to know each other. Walt told me later in our short life together that was the night he really fell in love with me. He loved to, in his words, watch my eyes dance when you talk and laugh. It was a lovely time and forever cherished in my heart. I had one more night before I flew to Seattle. On that evening, Walt had asked if I wanted to get a bite to eat, which I most certainly did with him. Then he offered to take some of the pressure off my schedule and help me pack to get ready by bringing dinner over. This gentleman of mine had me at hello, as the movie lore goes. He showed up with a bottle of wine, 2 wine glasses in hand, and a cooler with some dinner takeout, so I wouldn't have to worry about any dishes that night. We talked for a long while that night over dinner. When he left, he took the garbage from my apartment out for me and also took my luggage down to the car for me. Then as we said goodnight and how fun it would be to keep in touch on the road, as he had a trip coming up that we keep him traveling for a week after I returned, he was so very sweet in asking if he might kiss me. What do you think I said? After he got back from traveling, he told me there were things in place for him to actually be moving away from Colorado, but he wanted to spend as much time with me as possible until then. But again, divine timing and intervention, he stayed, and still stayed, then stayed for good here in Colorado. He stayed for me and for us. We were so happy. In our time together, we enjoyed beginning a life together that would be truly a gift. Walt left on a Monday night, April 22nd, 2013, birthday. He had not been feeling good for a few days before then, but seemed to be on the mend. I came home from work a little early as we were getting snow that night, and I wanted to be with him. We were dog sitting in Bell Mountain, and I also wanted to get home before driving on the roads became more difficult. We enjoyed being together that night as every night. At one point, I asked if he wanted to lie down in the bedroom. I wondered if he would be more comfortable there, or I could bring him a blanket. He said, "No, I want to be right where I am, here with you." And we continued to talk, laugh, watch movies, and hang out with the dogs together. At one point, we sat together and hugged. He told me that the biggest support system for him was me being there. I told Walt, "I love you, you are getting better, and I'm not going anywhere." He hugged me back and said as well, "I love you, and I'm not going anywhere." Around 9:15 that evening, after being so sweet as he always was, taking the dogs out to the backyard, Walt was gone from me. He had a water bottle in his hand, which I heard crunch. He was within a foot of me on the couch. He fell over to one side, toward me, and facing toward the floor, without a sound or a final word. After the medics arrived, my heart will never forget the gentle fireman who was the one to come over to me and with compassion and kindness say that they had tried everything, but Walt was not able to be revived. What I do know for sure is this: he was with me and exactly where he wanted to be. He was loved, he adored and loved me. He was happy and at peace. In the minutes, hours, days, and months since, life has taken on a hue and a surreal sense that I cannot explain beyond the grief of losing, and now on a journey to recovering, my heart and soul. We had been through so much together in a short amount of time. We had just become engaged officially on that Valentine's Day, although we had talked about it in advance and told family and close friends. Walt even asked my parents for permission to marry me, which touched them deeply as they knew how happy I was. On Valentine's night at dinner, Walt asked me to marry him with these words: "I love you, sweetie. I adore you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." And indeed, he did exactly that. Since his transition, there have been things that have shown up that I trust will eventually renew my faith in things unseen and beyond the veil. The separation between here and there is, as a kind friend and the pastor at Walt's funeral service described, no real difference between here and there. There is just here without the T. How do I know there's a realm that is beyond the veil? How do I know Walt is still here for me? These are the glimpses I see. A knowing in my heart and soul of a love that Walt and I share. An entire lifetime condensed into a time on this earth that was far too short, but a connection that runs far deeper than time on a calendar. The blue jay that showed up at my brother's office window within a day of Walt's church service. Never before had a bird showed up at the window of the office, literally pecking against the window, time after time, as if to say, "Hey you, I'm here." He would land on the tree outside the office, then take flight over to the window, with barely a ledge to stand upon, peck at the window a few times, and fly back to the tree. Over and over, and for many days after Walt's passing, this is what the blue jay did, and still happens a lot. In the clouds where I looked up one day, the summer after Walt transitioned, to see a huge W in the puffy white clouds of a beautiful blue sky. In a Christmas gift from friends, a journal containing pictures of birds and dragonflies, with a saying special to me for the connection through the birds to the sky. I pray to the birds because I believe they will carry the messages of my heart upward, by Terry Tempest Williams. In what I call fur fixes, where beautiful dogs make their way to me, I feel comfort and sense they may be comforting me and Walt, or perhaps on behalf of Walt at the same time. He loved dogs, as do I. One day while at breakfast with friends in Castle Pines, within a few weeks after Walt passed, neighbors of my friends met us there, and they happened to have several of their dogs with them. I couldn't hold myself back from going to pet them, because they were beautiful and Walt would have loved them too. They came over to me immediately with the unconditional love dogs hold for all of us. Those loving dogs took me out of my sadness for at least a few moments. At Walt's service, which was attended by an overflowing church of attendees, I pulled all of the courage I had together and read this: "The adventure of life is to learn. The goal of life is to grow. The nature of life is to change. The challenge of life is to overcome. The essence of life is to care. The secret of life is to dare. The beauty of life is to give. The joy of life is to love." By William Arthur Ward. Walt loved me and I loved him. He was my joy of life, a gift beyond measure. So that's the story, as I shared with in Quentin's book with everyone that also contributed to that book. There were a couple of other things that happened after Walt passed. I had a medical diagnosis handed down of MS about 5 months after. And then a few months after that, Walt had a cat who was then my cat. And around Christmas time that same year, we had to put him to sleep, which was really hard because it was another piece of Walt and I. But I have a friend who does animal communication, which is something that I only had kind of a minimal sense about before all of these things happened. And she was able to do a communication with Gateway, was the name of Walt's cat. And bear with me for 1 second. I talked with her about this initially because, again, my familiarity with animal communication was minimal, but she said, I can make a communication with him even if it's not an animal that I know. I didn't know if it had to be an animal that was living at the time. We talked all around that, and then I asked her if she could try and communicate with Walt's cat. So I wanted to read, I did a letter to his cat to kind of ask questions I had on my mind, and then I'll share with you what the response was back. So my letter was, "Dear Gateway, I write this as I contemplate my time with you as Walt's buddy. My friend Terry is assisting me as a connection to you in expressing these thoughts. I find it so interesting that Walt named you as he did." And as an aside, he named Gateway, you'll see him in a minute, but Gateway is a tuxedo cat, and he was a fairly large cat. And Walt named him after the Gateway cow, which was Walt's sense of humor, and that was hysterical. And then after all of these things have happened, I just find it very interesting that he was named Gateway. So I do believe that in some ways you are and have been a gateway for Walt and me. Even if I can't put into words very well why I believe that, I just do. And this was in late August of 2014. Anyway, if you were here and could hear me in this realm, my dear kitty, I would say, I am so sorry if you felt any distance from me in our apartment, either in Walt's place or our apartment together after he moved in. Walt kept the door closed to the bedroom because of his kitty allergies, and we got used to doing that in our apartment together. I know I could have left the door open after Walt left you and I, but I know he hadn't had you declawed, which I might guess you were actually glad about, sparing you the pain. I was used to the door closed and letting you roam in the main room and have your space. I know you liked the deck when I could keep the door open. I hope you heard Walt say to me so many times when you and he and I shared the apartment together, "That cat really loves you." And I never wanted you to feel behind last fall when the medical issues arose. I don't know if you knew that I had those medical issues come up and was overwhelmed still in missing Walt, and I was feeling scared and helpless. I didn't know if I could take care of you like he did. I love you too, and I hope you can forgive me. Finally, I hope you are with Walt, and I hope perhaps there are some things that you could pass on to me to help me through this process. Thank you, and I miss both of you. Love, me. And this was the response that my friend got back from Gateway. She says, "As you requested, I contacted Gateway and asked him the questions you provided. He is a comforting soul and still loves you. He appreciates your concern, but he in no way felt any distance when you and Walt closed him out of the bedroom. He says cats are very independent and need their own space."